Hi. Hi, I'm Ryan. I'm going to talk to you about the internet, a great idea that humanity had that definitely hasn't caused any problems for anyone ever. I'm from the Desmond-Fish Public Library in Garrison, New York. I'm a digital services librarian there, and I'm the director of the Innovation Learning Center, which is our makerspace and education center there, which is focused on the intersection of science and the arts and social justice through free access to technology. So what we're going to talk about today is I'm going to talk to you about different generations, how they use the internet. I'll give sort of a brief overview with a lot of generalizations, which is probably not fair, but it's the internet, so that's what we do. I'll talk to you briefly about like how each generation uses the internet, some values and challenges and stuff like that for each kind of age demographic, and then we'll talk about ways to do intergenerational programming, and then some examples of like challenges or sort of ways in which you might have these kind of conversations in the library program. All right, so the first important truth is we are all terminally online. The reason it's important to realize that is that we are all of us age groups are terminally online and usually around at the same rate. So sometimes when we're doing library programs, we tend to skew our programming toward what we think of as the heaviest social media users, which would be the young, which like is often not the case. So to make sure, and sometimes we skew our library programs for digital literacy programs toward older adults. But focusing on those kind of poles of internet use misses out on the bigger picture of how people are interacting and using the internet and stuff. All right, so let's look at some examples, and I'll take you very quick. I'm trying to get the whole presentation in within this time, and we'll see if that works. So we're gonna start with boomers. So I'm gonna go from oldest to youngest. So this is age group that I'm categorizing as 59 plus, and I realize I'm lumping in like the oldest groups, like I'm not referencing like silent generation and all of that. We're all going to talk sort of as a unit, and that's because there's not a lot of data on how they use the internet or what their values are in internet usage, but also because when they do use the internet in larger numbers, it tends to be a pretty similar use case to the boomer generation. So boomers are the second most heavy users of social media. They only narrowly lose to Gen Z, and that's really only by about an hour a week difference. Given the rate at which they are closing on our youngest users, I would expect that in the next couple of years, they'll probably outpace that and become the heaviest users of social media. They overwhelmingly prefer Facebook with little penetration into other platforms. So when it comes to social media use, your older patrons, your older adults are pretty much stuck on Facebook or Telegram. So they really tend to use it for social interaction and local interaction. They tend to use Facebook as their main source of news. And that source of news is not from news sources, it's largely from peers. They report being as an age group, they generally report the highest to trust peers as sources of information. And they're also least able to distinguish misinformation from fact to a startling degree. And this is not just boomers, this is sort of around 50 plus. This change starts to come into effect. People of this age range are 7 times more likely to share false information. They're also twice as likely to be unable to distinguish opinion from fact. And they're kind of more likely to trust information that comes from peers and less likely to be able to recognize or change that view afterwards. They're also, and not that much research has been done into this, but it is interesting when you do read it. They're the group least likely to equate online behavior with offline personality, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. Although they're the least likely group to shop online, they're also the most likely to fall victim to scams and phishing attempts. And they're the age demographic most targeted for and most susceptible to radicalization to far-right extremism, and the most resistant to de-radicalization measures. So my special research focus and our special programming focus in the lab is on social media mental health and the influence, counteracting the influence, and how libraries can work counteracting the influence of QAnon and far-right extremist movements, and provide support to families who've had family members lost to QAnon or other far-right extremist movements. So you'll see that come in here. So the large-scale radicalization to extremism of older adults is massive, and I'm sure you've seen it in your libraries, but that they far more than the young, they are the target of these attempts. Gen X sort of overlaps the most with boomers in terms of what they value online and how they use it. They largely came to heavy online use in a professional capacity, and still are the group most likely to use to report that they use social media for professional reasons, meaning networking and stuff like that, as opposed to social interaction. They also prefer Facebook and don't penetrate that heavily into other platforms, although more so than boomers. Like boomers, older Gen Xers, and again, this is like 50 plus, so the lower end kind of doesn't exhibit these tendencies, the older end does, combine lower digital literacy skills with a tendency to use social endorsements as credibility, predisposing them to misinformation, radicalization, and scams. They're the least likely demographic to engage in digital parenting. And so you see this cutoff around when, like in research about this, you sort of see this cutoff around when people came to the internet either in childhood or young adulthood versus as an adult, how willing they are to engage their children with conversations about the internet. And even less so than boomers who have like grandparent relationships, they're less likely to engage in conversations with their kids about how they use the internet, or engage in, work about making their kids sort of have a healthy relationship to the internet. They largely are polarized in terms of parenting style online between no oversight or restrictions, which is most common, or heavily authoritarian measures. So I am taking your phone. You are not allowed to use this. I am blocking X and X and X. But they're the least likely demographic to kind of have those conversations. Gen X and millennials often share an ignorance of the algorithm and personalized content, even when they're aware that it exists. This will come up again later, but and I'll sort of use this to segue between Gen X and millennials. But so when you're looking at social media, or when you're looking at kind of almost anything online, what you're seeing is not the same as what other people are seeing, right? Your feed is different from everyone else's feed because your data is being used to personalize your content, and an algorithm is being employed to show you content with which you are meant to interact. However, the consciousness of this and our ability to respond to that and be aware of that tends to be more limited in kind of older adults. They tend to more like even millennials and Gen X, they tend to kind of take what they see at face value, and there isn't as much of an awareness that things are for you and different for others. Millennials are the only generation, hi, I'm a millennial, the only generation to both grow up with internet access and possess memories before it. I think we got it when I was like 7. So they're most closely aligned with Gen Z's social media use and perspectives on the internet and value system of online life. They're usually the most technologically proficient of the generational groups. And I think sometimes we don't do digital literacy programs for children because we assume that kids are great and they can fix grandma's passwords and they know how to do everything. But keep in mind that your youngest users will largely have their experience with technology be limited to very closed devices like phones and iPads and Chromebooks. Don't touch mommy's computer, right? These are the things you can have. You can have the tablet. So when it comes to responding to things like phishing attempts or scams or stuff like that, the youngest age group can't always distinguish those because they don't know how to manage a file system or remove a virus or install a program, right? There is a gap in their relation. Although other generations spend more time on social media, millennials use the widest number of platforms. For whatever reason, millennials will just like stick with really crappy platforms for like a really long time and have like accounts on kind of everything. So a millennial may have a Facebook and an Instagram and a TikTok and a Snapchat and a whatever. Whereas the older generations sort of stick to Facebook and don't venture too far from that. And the younger generations usually pick one or two and then abandon them or adopt them as necessary. Millennials are less susceptible to scams like phishing attempts or fake emails or people calling you and saying they're from Apple and give us your password, but they're more inclined to cultural or social scams like cryptocurrency, multi-level marketing, NFTs, all of that. Cryptocurrency is a Ponzi scheme, by the way. It's trash. Don't do it. They're also the generation that's most susceptible to health-related misinformation. Health and wellness related misinformation, as I think we saw it during COVID. Then kinds of other false related content. Having had internet access largely unmonitored during their formative years, they're usually involved digital parents to a varying degrees of success and failure. But they are sort of more willing than older adults to have those conversations and facilitate those with children. So if you're doing intergenerational programming, the younger kids are usually getting a kind of different kinds of conversations as they move into their digital life than teens had at that age. So just to be aware. Gen Z, we love them. There's this popular image, I think that Gen Z are all like catastrophically online, like non-binary communists. And it's true, they're awesome. They are the heaviest social media users, but not by much. However, their use of social media is somewhat different than others. They're more likely than any other age group to say that they use social media primarily for entertainment rather than social connection. All of these age groups prefer video and photo content. And especially Gen Z prefers video content. And they're largely using that as entertainment rather than kind of the keeping up with a culture or a social whatever. They also value the use of social media for activism or education on social justice topics more so than other ages. And that's something that's extremely impactful on their use. And something to keep in mind as part of their value system for what they should be doing online and what they do online. They contrast with millennials and they prefer a narrow range of social media platforms. So they will do they'll have an Instagram and a TikTok, but they won't use something else. And then when they get bored of one thing or their friends move off of it, they'll abandon that platform instead of keeping up with a wide range of stuff. So it's important to keep a conversation with your younger patrons about like what they're on. They're on TikTok. That's what they're doing. I hate videos. I don't know. They tend to, and this is important, prefer transitory media to static or curated media. So what that means is that on your social media platforms, you'll have something like a post or your Facebook timeline, right? Where everything you post stays there on your Instagram timeline. Younger users tend to value and interact more heavily with transitory content like Instagram stories that go away after 24 hours. Right? Things that go out there that you see within a time window. There's Be Real, which we're not getting into, and kind of abandon. Okay, it's more of a transitory experience. In contrast to other age groups, far-right extremist propaganda is largely successful only to a specific slice of the demographic. So in other age groups, you usually see far-right propaganda sort of seeping into different corners of that demographic, like millennial white women are a really high vulnerability for radicalization. But for younger adults, it's usually specifically successful with cis straight white males. And usually that kind of propaganda is going to be overwhelmingly misogynist in nature rather than racist in nature toward other groups. Like the sort of, they share sort of a bent toward fascism, but generally it'll be appealing to young men as disenfranchised because of women. as opposed to like disenfranchised because of racial groups or Jews or whatever. While Gen Z, like millennials and their youth, use social media for experimentation with their identity, they're likelier to rank authenticity as a major value in how they and others present their lives. I'll come back to that later. Just a heads up that when you're treating these things, things are different for girls and femme presenting individuals online. So oh my God, am I really at 5 minutes? Okay. So what should a librarian do? Remember that digital life is real life. Also, social media serves a need. So be mindful of perspectives. What need does social media meet for each person? So when you're using social media, you're using it to meet a need. Is that need social connection? Is that need time wasting? Is that need creative? When you're having conversations with intergenerational groups, you kind of want to figure out where each person is coming from and what content they value and why. Whose voices do they value, blah, blah, blah. You want to center the subjective in there. So when you're doing a presentation that's, that's on social media mental health, or you're doing a presentation on online safety, you want to make that a conversation, because a kid's experience of their lives online needs to be recognized and valued in order for them to listen to advice from their parents. And the parents need to hear that what they think their kid's experience online might be is not what it would be. When they interact with others, what are their interactions like? What are their goals? So run your programs workshop style as conversations. Know the vulnerabilities and when to communicate them. Sometimes you want to just sort of hint at like, you might want to kind of stay away from these sources or be aware of this thing. And sometimes you kind of need to let them sort of figure that out. I have many scenarios for things to do, but just for one example, a parent thinking about their teen's future is concerned with the flippant way they use social media and urges them to present a more restrained and professional face online. The teen scoffs at this idea and says their parent doesn't understand. So what's happening here? What's happening is a usage clash and a values clash. So the parent, say like a millennial or young Gen X, is used to static content, right? Things on the internet last forever. Right? What's posted there, your employer can come see it. Your whatever lasts forever. So a usage clash is that the teen prefers transitory content, and most of the things they're posting will disappear in 24 hours anyway. Their digital trail is less impactful than the parent imagines it to be. At the same time, there's also a values clash, whereas the parent sees a restrained kind of putting your best face forward, sharing what will connect you to others, face of what should be posted on social media. The younger person is in a culture that values authenticity and relatability and connection. And so when they're putting things that don't necessarily reflect perfectly upon themselves, that's a value, because that's the authentic self that's being communicated. Okay, so what do you do in this case? You try to facilitate, and this is an actual thing that came up in the program that I was doing. So what do? You try to understand that there are different values for each of those age groups and be able to communicate, you might want to focus all of that stuff just in transitory media and not on posts that will go on that will be static, or let's do that within a smaller circle, right? Let's limit that, let's limit the privacy settings. All right. Here's this one, and then Carolyn will probably tell me I'm time. On a community Facebook group, a display or program at the library has caused outrage among a segment of users who blast the thread with angry posts about the woke mob. Some other users entered the thread to argue with them. Your board urges you to respond, suggesting a press release to clear the air. How do we respond to this? Well, the first is to get our perspective, right? One thing to keep in mind, because I know that this can feel like overwhelming and panicky, is to realize that it's a very small subset of users who are using this platform in a very specific way, right? This is a particular demographic who's using that platform, who's kind of probably not got the story straight, and they're arguing amongst themselves. This isn't your whole community. This isn't a microcosm of your community. This is a microcosm of a particular of a tiny portion of a demographic, right? So And it's also a demographic that you're not going to change their mind. So a wider release of something like a press release, which is never a good idea, is going only to spread that problem and bring that problem offline into the real world, right? So probably the best response to that, if you were, working with your library, you might say the best response is to let it work itself out. Let it burn itself out, keep doing what you're doing, and largely you won't hear that again, because often for that demographic, the things that take place online don't come offline into the real world. Okay, so we're gonna skip all of these, and I'm just gonna say, I'm Ryan. I'd love to hear from you. I will talk to you anytime if you'd like to see this presentation or go over this stuff, or we could have done any of it if I didn't talk so much. So, but don't call me because I'm a millennial and we don't like talking on the phone. Thank you.